Welcome one, welcome all. You're tuned in to Zuri Djan on 97.5 Kemet FM's Talk Bite Show. And I am so thrilled to be here, the first Sunday in February and the first Sunday of every month for conscious uplifting and edifying discussions on topics affecting the Black community. How are you, the people? I hope you're all good. You are reminded that this show is pre-recorded, so you won't be able to call in. However, if you have questions, ideas for topic discussions, or want to contribute to the show, please do WhatsApp me on 07776 977 277. I'll say that again. 07776 977 277. So, I have a question for you. What is your understanding of racism? Is it when non-Black people use offensive language? Does it mean when you make repeated unsuccessful applications for jobs or promotion, even though you are the most qualified or experienced? Is it when a non-Black person asks you, where do you come from? And when you say England, their response is, no, where do you really come from? You want the answer? This quote that I'm going to give you is from a new book that should be on everyone's reading list. The book is by Brother Howard Dean Johnson. And the title of the book is The Racism Handbook for People Classified as Black, a Guide to how racism really works. And I'm going to quote you something from the introduction. It says, you can spend a lifetime misunderstanding how racism actually works. During that time, you may think you know, but you may not actually know, because racism is not what you think it is. You could become very educated, wealthy, famous, academic, and articulate. Yet it does not follow that you will not fall under the control of racist forces that can negatively control you. These deceptive forces, white, Arab, and Asian, can use and control you. Yet these forces are also Black people who are deracinated, conditioned, controlled, deeply colonized, self-hating individuals. All of these people can miseducate you into their world views. They will tell you how to think and what decisions you should make in your life. The truth is, as a person classified as Black, you should not accept any ideology until you properly understand how the world functions in terms of race and racism, what they are and how they actually work in relation to you. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. When we read that, brother, Mr. I think bring this brother up on board. Had to. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be having this discussion even, with the author of the Racism Handbook. I urge you to listen to the end of this interview, as I know you will be blown away by what the brother has to say. Brother Howard, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Zuri. I'm really grateful for this platform at the moment. Thank you so much.
I am so appreciative that you took the time to come on the show. I've read many a book in my time. I have to say that this one blew me away. The level of critique, analysis, research, for me was phenomenal. So the first question that I want to ask you, brother, is what is the Racism Handbook? Why did you write it?
Great question, Zuri. The Racism Handbook is a Black studies book. What I'm trying to do is recenter Black studies. We do have Black studies here in the UK. in Birmingham, of course, at Birmingham City University. But what I'm trying to do is recenter Black studies from the grassroots upwards, to have a Black study in a book over 3 volumes so that you don't need to go to university and you can get the full dynamic of the inclusive conceptual framework of Black studies. So my book is a Black studies guide. Now, it is called the Racism Handbook for people classified as Black because I use the term racism as a metonym for the post-colonial condition. And of course, when we look at the conceptual framework for Black studies, one of the main aspects of Black studies is that it's a counter-racist activity. That's what it is. I was speaking to one brother who wasn't too happy with my title because he thought it should just be called Introduction to Black Studies. But as I said, just saying there, that one of the main aspects of Black studies is that it's a counter-racist activity. It's one of its inherent dynamics, really, is that it is, in fact, an anti-racist activity. So I call the book the Racism Handbook for people classified as Black, so that it can be more broader to people on the streets, because that word racism, of course, covers all of the post-colonial dynamic and struggle and resistance and so on. So the Racism Handbook is essentially a Black studies guide presented through the lens of anti-racist discourse.
So there's some things that I want to break down. I want you to break down, Brother Howard. The first is a concept of racism, because from what I've read, you've not defined it as mistreatment or limited it to mistreatment of Black people. You've gone beyond that to look at it at a systematic level and at a scientific level. So can you explain what you mean by racism?
Okay, well, when we think of the common or the normative view of racism in society, people generally tend to just think of what they often call the interpersonal or the individual racism. So racism that is enacted because of racialization between individuals. And that, of course, is racism, individual racism. But what reifies that, and by reify I mean to make real, what makes individual racism real is that it is, in fact, systemic, which means global and internal. So it's structural, systemic, and therefore it makes individual behaviors real. In other words, people feel emboldened by being racist to others. So if we want to encapsulate it then, really the problem of racism is systemic racism, but then it pans out to be institutional, structural in certain frameworks within certain layers of society, and then it goes right down to the individual one-to-one behavior. But in my book, I have a definition of racism, and I immediately center it as global. So in my definitions, we can call it a system of racism, and we can call it systems of racism, because obviously there's racism in France, and there's racism in Germany, there's racism all over the planet. And each systems of racism impact Black people in different ways and other non-whites in different ways. So in that sense, we can say there are systems of racism. But essentially, there are 3 types of racism: individual racism, structural, systemic, and institutional overlap. Okay? Yeah. They overlap, structural, systemic, and institutional overlap. And then there's individual racism, one-to-one things that people may say to each other. But the main problem of racism for Black people is probably the psychological as well, which is the internalization of inferiority, okay? And you don't need a racist experience if you feel inferior because of systemic racism through education, through the media system and so on. Then, of course, you don't even need an experience. You just feel inferior. So that's basically what I'm trying to say there.
Thank you. And that's powerful. I'm going to quote something from the book, from your note, where you say, you can spend a lifetime misunderstanding how racism actually works. During that time, you may think you know, but you may not actually know, because racism is not what you think it is. You could become very educated, wealthy, famous, academic, and articulate, yet it does not follow you that you will not fall under the control of racist forces that can negatively control you. I quote that in light of what you said, and in light of the fact that there are those who feel that because we may have had an Asian prime minister or the leader of a party is black, and there are many members of the political parties that are not white, and we'll come to that expression in a moment, that we're living in a non-racialized society. Can you discuss that in the context of your understanding of racism, please?
Sure. Well, the idea of a post-racial society is really actually the reproduction of racism, because one of the major aspects of racism is to deny racism. Yes. When you deny racism, it's an act of racism, you see, because it's clearly empirical and clear to see, like Professor Robin Deej Kelly said, I was reading, I think I was watching one of his lectures. He said the new racism is to be anti-racist is almost to be accused of being racist. See? So in that sense, we're not living in a post-racial society, and those who claim that are merely denying and disavowing the legacies of empire, which we see around us every single day. So, yeah, it's here, it's real, it's empirical, and we feel it every day. We just have to look at the way society is structured, and it disadvantages black people mostly, and also other non-whites. So the evidence is overwhelming for those who are at the forefront of it.
You've written the book for people classified as black. So there are two questions that I want to pose. How do you define black? And why is it written for people classified as black as opposed to educating white people?
Okay. Excellent questions, by the way, excellent questions. The black is a racialized term. I mean, blackness comes into being through oppression. You see, the forced migration that happened at the time of slavery put it into place, didn't it, through slavery and colonialization. So black is a racialized term. And so when I say the book is for people classified as black, those racialized black through the systems of racism. So because we live through the legacies of racism, through the legacies of colonialism and slavery, we have been racialized as black. So black becomes a collective consciousness that we have among ourselves and a commitment to one another through struggle and resistance to fight the very machinations of the legacies of colonialism and slavery. So we are racialized as black. It's a racial term, insofar as white is a racial term and yellow is a racial, Chinese are supposedly yellow. These are racialized terms. And once we delve deep into how race is constructed, it becomes more transparent that the term black is racialized. There are, of course, misunderstandings among black people that black is just literally referring to the color. But of course, there's no actual black-skinned person on earth. It doesn't actually exist. If you look at the color of someone, it's a deep, dark color if their complexion is dark. Black people come across with a panoply of different colors, you see. We're not just black, so to speak, and you wouldn't find a black person in terms of what that color code would represent. So when we say black, then we're talking about a racialized condition, okay, in opposition to oppression. That's how our blackness came into being. And we see it in positive terms insofar as we talk often as a black consciousness. You see? A collective coming together to know that we're going to fight as a group our very oppression. And that's our blackness. Whiteness have their whiteness, we have our blackness, Asians have their brownness. This is all racial terms.
Yeah.
These are all racial terms, and black, of course, is a racial term as well.
And second part of the question was why the book is written for people classified as black. Why is it necessary to educate black people about racism as opposed to white people?
Well, one of the things I wrote in the book is that as I developed, I left school and so on, I got on with my life, it became quite clear to me, without doing much study actually, that really whites seem to know more about their consciousness than we seem to know about ours. So to me, I use a term in my book called racially illiterate, and I'm quite convinced, and I think there's enough empirical evidence to show it, that black people are the ones in need of race education, not whites. Most average white people are aware of their history. They may deny it and disavow it, but your average white person is quite aware of colonialism and slavery and the legacies of empire. It's black people through our oppression that have become, as Carter Woodson said, the what do you call it? The backwardness. He used the term Negro of the black person. Yes. Education of the Negro. That's what I was trying to remember. So we are miseducated through oppression. So black people today, certainly right now in the 20th century, and at this prescient time that we're living in, need more education than any white person. We really do need to understand it.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the book, you say that you've taken on an anti-racist approach and that an anti-racist approach stands upon certain basic tenets. I want to go through those tenets, if you don't mind, and ask you to comment on them. So the first tenet is that racism is the foundation of Western society. We are all socialized into a racial hierarchy. Can you explain that, please?
Yes, sure. Well, through slavery and colonialism, that begins with European expansionism. So Europe expands into the world. The British Empire specifically controls a good 3/4 of the planet. Okay, so through that process, we then realized. Can you just give me the question again? I've just lost myself there. I got a bit.
Sorry, racism is the foundation of Western society. We are all socialized into a racial hierarchy.
Okay, right. So that racial hierarchy comes directly from empire. You see, we are a people dominated through the systems of racism, of race, you see. So just read that other bit again. There was a little bit more to that you read there.
Yeah, so it was the first tenet. Racism is a foundation of Western society. We are all socialized into a racial hierarchy.
That's right. That's right. I know the bit I was writing there. So really, we're living through the legacies of empire, from forced migration. I mean, how did we get here? We were taken from Africa to Brazil, to the Caribbean, all across the world, even to parts of Europe. We're here through the processes of forced migration and slavery and subsequent colonialism. So through empire, the West is fundamentally built on racism.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. The West is built on racism, and therefore the very principles of white supremacy are embedded into the very political economy of the West. So if we think of the global North and the global South, wealth and resources are extracted let's just focus on Africa at the moment, from Africa, but other places in the global south, the core West, UK, US, France, United States of America and Canada are still, to this very day, extracting wealth. These are the center core cuts of the capitalist world economy are drawing from the global south, you see? So you don't just do that and it's not a racist practice. That is racism in terms of a capitalist world economic system, because they're drawing off our resources. And in order to justify that, they need to racialize us.
Yeah.
So in that sense, we're all drawn into this big racist development. Yeah. We're all part of it, and it's going to impact us in different ways. Yeah. Of course, if you're white, where we live here in the UK, then of course, you know that you're part of the dominant culture. So racialization is going to impact you, and it's harder for you to not perhaps act racism because you know that you're in a position of power. It impacts us where we can often be internalized racism to the degree that we can be negative towards each other. Yet all of this is the process of racialization. Yeah. We're all a part of it, but we're going to be affected in different ways. So black people get racialized, white people get racialized, and so do Asians as well.
So there's a level of dehumanization of us in order to justify and maintain global domination by those categorized as white. And thus, even when we have individuals within our community who are categorized as successful, in quotes, the success in one sense is meaningless if we as a community aren't treated as human beings.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a powerful point you're making there. And often it's hard for black people who are successful to have race consciousness or black consciousness. Very difficult to have it if you feel that the system has given you all that you need. So you have your house and your car, and maybe you got your, you got the family that you want or whatever. And so it's often difficult for black people who've achieved material things in the system to often see what it's like in other black people's shoes. So they get disenfranchised from the consciousness that black people have. Because black consciousness is a global commitment to us as a people. Doesn't matter if we're not Nigerians or Ghanaians or St. Lucians or Jamaicans. It doesn't really matter. Black consciousness is a commitment to our struggle, you see. But many blacks become disenfranchised from that if they get wealth, you see. And particularly academics as well. A lot of black academics in the United States who they don't want to know because they're successful. Yeah. They don't care. They don't care about the fact that black people, most black people are not participating in American society or even UK society in the fullest sense of the word.
I just want to focus on one point before I go on to the next tenet, which is this. I've spoken to individuals who are categorized as white about the concept of white privilege, which we'll speak about as well. And a response that I've heard is that their ancestors, their white ancestors, were also oppressed, that their ancestors did not come from a place of power or privilege. And I can only assume that they're saying that. Actually, I don't want to make any assumptions about why they're saying that. But are you able to comment on that in the context of racism and white privilege?
Sure. Because black people speak our oppression, that isn't to say that they were the only ones oppressed. It's just that we are the most oppressed. The evidence for that is overwhelming. So, for example, there is a history of white people, some who are Jews, who classify themselves as white, of oppression. There's been Irish oppression, Jewish oppression. There is oppression of white people. But right where we are now, systemic, structural discrimination, we're catching in using the term that Malcolm X used, we're catching more hell than anyone else. So it's not a denial of oppression of other people.
Yeah.
It's just to say, look, we're very oppressed. I mean, just look at social society. Just look at the way society is constructed in terms of education, housing, income, employment, underemployment. In all those areas, we're at the bottom.
Yeah.
So we're talking about racial inequality for Black people is disproportionate. Okay, it's not that we're denying that other people don't have a history of oppression, but what we're saying really, when it comes to structural and systemic racism, whites don't get structural and systemic racism. Yeah. There isn't an ethnic group out there suppressing whites, stopping them from having jobs and so on. Now, they do have class conflict among themselves. Class conflict is about resources. Of course, whites are struggling with each other for jobs and resources. No one's denying that. If you take the demographics of the United States and you were just looking at numbers, of course there's more poor whites, but then there's more whites than there are non-whites. You see, it's not a denial of oppression. It's just saying, let's look honestly at who's being oppressed and for why and why it's happening. And then, of course, we need to address these things in terms of reparation. Because take the United States, for example. I think it's around 4.9 trillion pounds behind white people in terms of wealth. That's phenomenal. And I'm sure, I don't have the stats for the British one, but I'm sure it's comparable.
Yeah.
Proportionally. Obviously, it's a smaller country. Okay. But imagine that. Trillions of pounds behind whites in wealth. Now, that's directly the product of slavery, you see, and Jim Crow in the United States and so on. So it's not about saying that whites don't have a history of oppression. It's not about that. It's saying we want to address the ongoing racial discrimination and racial inequality that Black people have to go through here in the UK and the United States specifically. Okay.
And I promise you I'm not going to be speaking about those classified as whites anymore.
You can if you want. No, Zuri, feel free. Absolutely. No, this is important really, because these are the questions that often whites put, I mean, they ask these questions as if we're saying that they don't have a history of oppression. Yeah. You see, don't forget, certain whites do have a history of oppression. There was Irish oppression, Jewish Holocaust, and so forth. But what we're saying is, look at the present situation. Yeah. Look at what happened to us through colonialism and slavery. Look what happened to African Americans in slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow, which is just racism, just slavery by another name. Okay, so these are the things, really. It's not a denial that there are poor, that there isn't poor whites. There are poor whites. Yeah. It's not a denial of that. It never has.
And I think one of the things that people fail to recognize is that your oppression didn't strip you of your identity. My oppression did. And that's something that I want to talk about in due course. But I'm going to go on to the next tenet, which is that all of us, in fact, it's linked to what we've just said, I think, all of us are deeply shaped by the destructive forces of racism. No one is exempt. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, if you live in a society that is based on racialization, it's going to affect you. I was born in the UK. Okay, so the minute you're born into a society. So if you're born into a society that has a history of empire, then of course you're going to be a part of that society. Yeah. Okay, so it's going to affect you psychologically as well. So we all participate in the racial hierarchy, but it affects us differently. So Black people internalize much of the racism that we see. Whites internalize it as well, but their demographic is bigger. So, a white child will know by the age of 7 or even earlier, I'm the dominant culture here. Yeah. Okay, so that's going to affect how they view themselves and other ethnic groups. So we're all participating in racism as a system, okay, but our participation isn't equal, okay, because it's going to affect you differently from it affects an Asian or a white person. So in that sense, we're all participating in the system. We're in it. What can we do?
Yeah, I remember having a discussion, another panel discussion, and we talked about the fact that Britain doesn't just call itself Britain, it calls itself Great Britain. And what that actually means, the psychological impact of describing yourself as great. And what would the impact be on the Black psyche if we described ourselves in a way that was uplifting, as opposed to how we often are perceived very negatively. Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's an amazing point you're making there. And that relates to what I believe is the second major problem of racism. The second major problem for Black people of racism is the internalization of inferiority. Yeah. Because if you're a young child, you go to school 5, 6, 7, and you're growing up and you're in your teens, if you feel inferior, you don't need a racist experience. No one needs to call you the N-word because you feel inferior. You read it through the books, the media, it's all around you, you see, reified by systems of racism. People can be racist to you because the system supports them being racist. So the internalization of racial, of inferiority is the number 2 problem.
Yeah.
You see? So, yes, we're in the midst of a racialized society and it's going to affect us.
I mean, if I can give a personal example, and I'm hoping that it resonates with a lot of the listeners, particularly those of us who are parents. I remember I grew up here in the UK until I was 14, and then my parents returned to Jamaica and I went with them. I was bright, very bright, but I was in the top class at school here, but believed internally, subconsciously and possibly consciously, that I should not come first in anything. I did not think it was my place to come first in any test, any exam. That wasn't for me. And I always remember one time my parents travelled to Nottingham and we travelled by Nottingham University. And I remember consciously thinking that that was a place that I could never go to. And it was only when I went to Jamaica and lived in Jamaica and the expectations for me was that you come first. Second is not good enough. It was only then that I felt that I had the right and the duty and the responsibility to do my best. And I just think for someone who had grown up in a loving household, if that's the impact on me, you know, how impactful racism is for all Black people on a day-to-day basis.
We've all got similar stories.
Yeah.
Where we just have a kind of reduced feelings about our capabilities. It's coming from the wider society. It's coming from the books. It's coming from the media. It's coming from people's attitudes and so on. Again, we internalize it, you see? And of course, if we were the dominant culture, we probably would internalize it differently. But yes, I totally understand that. I really, really do understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. All right, next tenant. All white people benefit from the racial hierarchy regardless of their intentions. Please explain.
Well, of course, there are, what I mean by that is there are progressive whites.
Yeah.
Okay. This may be controversial for some Blacks, but I don't think all whites are individual racists. Yeah. Not all whites are. Just basic maths will tell you that all whites on the planet can't all be individual racists. So just read that tenet to me again. What was it? What is it?
Yes. All white people benefit from the racial hierarchy regardless of their intentions.
Right. So if you have progressive whites, it may not be their intention to be racist towards you or to implement racist policies or something discriminatory. But of course, they may well do it. You see? They may well do it. Follow that they would do it, but they may do it. Yeah? Yeah. Now, the benefits are that you normally see benefits in terms of the way that wealth is distributed in society. So if we look at those variables again of income, this is well documented in terms of stats that obviously black people sometimes just can't earn as much as our white counterparts. You see what I mean? So it's housing. We often don't have good homes and so forth. We can't afford homes because we have low wages and so on. So whites do benefit from a racist society.
Yeah.
And the term for that we use is white privilege. Got nothing to do with whether they got white skin, because they haven't got white skin. It's a race privilege, basically. Yeah. That's what that means. All right. Yeah. If a society is based on racial hierarchy that there are people at the top of the hierarchy, they're going to get more material wealth than others at the lower end of it. That's all that means. Now, if you're progressive white, you want to be anti-racist and so on, yeah, that's good, but you might still be doing it unconsciously.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another point that came to mind as you were talking, Howard, about the impacts of racism and the benefits, quote unquote, of white privilege, is that it's not just restricted to the allocation of resources. It's the impact in terms of the psyche. So I probably best demonstrate it by way of an example. You may be with a group of your black friends, regardless of where you are. If a white person comes in, the dynamic changes. And often you will see black people, if we're talking them patois, whatever, that stops. They'll adapt to that white environment. White people aren't doing that. They're not changing to adapt to us. They're not going to, unless they feel that they're street or they want to get some black cred, they're going to change their language, their mannerisms, their behavior to make us feel comfortable. But we will do it in circumstances where there's no justification, no need, no requirement.
Well, that's to do, it's to do with, we're living in a society that's based on racial hierarchy. So that comes under the psychology of racism. We're going to behave in certain ways. Now, how do we to behave in positive ways that builds our own self-worth and so on? We need race consciousness. Yeah. See, a lot of whites see that as negative, but actually, if a black person wants to build race consciousness, is to build notions of who they are, they have a history, they feel they come from somewhere, and so on. You build your race consciousness, you understand your history, you understand your culture, and that gives you a sense of self-worth, so that perhaps you wouldn't act in ways that you know are counterproductive to your advancement, you know. So, the psychology of racism, that comes under.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about culture later on, Howard, because I've got some questions that I want to put to you. But I'm going to go back to the next tenet, which is racism must be continually identified, interrupted, challenged, and analysed openly and honestly. If I could ask you to speak about that.
Well, I mean, I actually believe that obviously racism, while we have the capitalist world economy in the way that it is, all right, where the core countries are constantly extracting resources and wealth from the global south and so on. While we have that, that's just capitalist racism, racism is permanent. It's permanent at the moment until certain countries, if we just speak in terms of Africa, get economic liberation, okay? Economic sovereignty, so that they have control of their own wealth, their own resources for the betterment of their own people. While that's not happening, racism is permanent on this planet. So that doesn't mean that we should just accept it. We should interrupt it. We should talk about it. We should flag it up when we see it, because we have to survive. It's ongoing struggle and resistance. You see, we're going to have children, we're going to have families. We have to continue to fight it until it may not happen in our lifetime, until we have a major revolutionary shift in the world. But that major revolutionary shift is to do with the capitalist world economy, without a doubt. Okay, it's not just about the aggregate of many white people not being racist to many black people. That's the individual stuff. The global world, capitalist world economy needs to shift. Also, we need reparations. Until those two things are addressed, we still have to struggle and resist every day, just for our own sanity, for goodness sake. You see, just to be sane, we must fight racism every single day. And there are people that will help us to do it. But as a group, it's incumbent on us, black people, to have a collective consciousness. And I have to say, many black people do not. And what I find very saddening is the university, the academics, the black intellectuals. Not all of them, but some of them are sickening. The way they've got, they're happy with the wealth they've accrued, with their position in society. So now it's like, pull the ladder up, don't care about anybody else.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? There are a lot of these black intellectuals in the United States, and some here, are just selfish people, okay? Because they've got what they want. They don't want to interrupt and fight racism daily. They now want to have a language that really is false, that denies empire.
Yeah.
See, that disavows all the past and so on. You see? So, no, it has to be constantly fought against. We have to battle against racism. We have to interrupt it, and we have to talk against it. Even though we might not see a massive shift in our lifetime, essential that we do it.
I'm going to talk about later on, or ask you about how we actually do that. But you talked about Africa. And in fact, one of my questions I was going to ask you later, but I think I'll ask you now, is this. Is a re-emergent Africa necessary for Africans throughout the world to connect with their authentic self, to acquire their internal power? Or do Africans have to acquire their internal power for there to be a re-emergent Africa?
This feeds into what I call black consciousness. You see, Zuri, black consciousness is our problem. That's our problem on this planet. If we had black consciousness globally among each other, and let me just quickly define black consciousness. This is a spiritual, psychological, cultural, and economic commitment to being black. You see? It doesn't matter if you're Ghanaian or Jamaican or Nigerian, a commitment to black, because black has been oppressed on this planet. So if we had this black consciousness, there would never have been slavery, never have been colonialism, never have been Jim Crow. None of that would have happened. But black people, we don't have the level of consciousness. We're very individualistic. That's what's going on. So it doesn't matter that we're not Ghanaians or Nigerians, but they are black, we are black. They need and we need to have this collective consciousness. And when black people have a collective consciousness and a commitment to blackness, then we'll have massive revolutionary change. You see, because take the capitalist world economy. Take that at the moment. The total extraction, and I speak black because I am classified as black, but we're talking largely of the global south, okay? The global north against the global south. If we blacks had this black consciousness, there would be no Western structural programs. That wouldn't exist. the Africans would come together and say, no, we don't need your structural programs. There would no siphoning, constant siphoning of Africa's wealth, you see? So that all comes back to this consciousness, so that when we go to Africa or the Caribbean, yes, there are ethnic differences between us, but we were connected by this common collective oneness. Garvey spoke of this, didn't he? In his time, you see, when he spoke of the Negroes of the world coming, he used that term Negro, you see, of all coming together and understanding that we need a black nation. You see what I mean? Yeah. It doesn't need to be realized in terms of a modern nation state today, but certainly at the early stages of it, we need black consciousness, a commitment to each other. And I think when black people have that, I think we're going to see some revolutionary change. But we don't have it. We don't presently have it. And certainly blacks in the UK and the US, once they get a little bit of wealth, a little bit of money, they become very, very greedy and very selfish and think only of themselves. They don't even think of their children's children. They can't reach it that far. I hope that answers that question a little bit.
Yeah, it answers that question, but it raises even more questions for me, Howard.
No problem.
I want to talk about this concept of black consciousness.
Okay,
so I'm going to try and analyze what you said because it's so powerful to make sure I understand fully.
Go, take your time.
So for me, the unity, if that is the word, or the common thread may be a better term, that connects those categorized as white is capitalism and the impacts of capitalism in terms of global power, global domination. For one of the things that you said, which really resonated with me, was that if there was this black consciousness, then there would not have been systems of, not necessarily systems of slavery, but there would not have been slavery as experience, that it would not have been colonialism and the like. So it seems that black consciousness in that respect is a recognition that there is a connection amongst us all as black people, regardless of culture, regardless of ethnicity.
Absolutely.
And my thing is, this black consciousness that we have now is predicated on our fight against racism and its impact.
Perfect.
Yeah?
Perfect.
So I suppose my point is, if our fight is against something, then who are we in the absence of that something, if that makes sense? Because I'm trying to think, so, and maybe I'm being too, I don't know what the word is. Pre-slavery, as a continent, we were living in communities. I'm not sure how we were living. I know we were living in communities. And I would imagine we identified based on our clan, based on our distinct cultures. So now that we're living as oppressed people, who are we if we are able to overcome that oppression? How do we live collectively in the absence, if that happens, of that oppression? And how do we identify now outside of racism? Because we don't want racism to define who we are, if that makes sense.
Well, I think I could answer it this way, if I think I understand you. Well, let's take Europe, for example, as an example. We'll take the landmass of Europe, and imagine it's a continent. You have Spanish people, Portuguese, French, German, and so on. These are different ethnic groups that have been classified as white. Now, there are distinctions between a French person and a Spanish person, isn't it? Okay, they've got their differences in food and so on. But because Europe knows it lives in a racialized world, there's white consciousness among them. So that when global problems come to them, okay,
Yeah.
they will come together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though they accept their distinctions of food and dress and language, they know they're classified as white. You see, and in terms of racism and oppression, they often come together. We see that in history to fight against us. We saw that with the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now let's look it over to black people, because I was having a similar conversation with a black school teacher who believes strongly in the nation state. So he's St. Lucian.
Yeah.
Okay, so to him, life is just about race and representation. I've got a job, I'm represented in the school, and so on. That's all there is.
Yeah.
What I was trying to tell him is that the reason I don't have that position, because I believe that black people need a global commitment to one another. So I think what I'm trying to say to you, and I think this is probably what you're alluding to, is that it's okay for you to be a Jamaican, for this person to be a Nigerian, for this person to be whatever they want to be in terms of an ethnic group, but we need a global commitment to blackness, because blackness came into being through oppression. That's what I'm saying. So if there was no colonialism, okay, and prior to colonialism and slavery, we had land in common, pre-colonial times. There was no, the means of production was the land itself, and we had it in common. We didn't even have borders, yet we knew there were ethnic differences between us, okay? So, if there was no colonialism, it's hard to predict where we'll be today, okay? But we still acknowledge our distinctiveness as various ethnic groups within certain countries. So it's not a denial of our differences, but it's an understanding that while the capitalist world economy is really killing black people, I mean, I think it's something like 10 or 12 black children die every day because they're not getting food and water, basic necessities. 9 million people living in poverty and so on in some of these non-white countries. Certainly, so it's about that. It's about coming together as a black people, coming together and having a commitment against racial discrimination at the global level. And at the global level, it functions through the capitalist world economy.
So someone now listening in, living their ordinary lives, as it were, just trying to make ends meet from, day to day, week to week. What can they do in order to, I suppose, elevate themselves and fight against racism?
I think the first thing to do is to educate yourself into
Your book. Yes, for real.
Understand the black self. You see, my book is a black studies guide. Understand the black self. Black studies has between 10 and 12 disciplines: race, class, gender, sociology, psychology, you see, the arts, and so on, economics, science, religion, literature. You see, Black Studies is a celebration of the experience of black people. We become the agents of our own agency, so to speak. We are our own agency. We celebrate our own selves. So really, there is a kind of conceptual framework that can be used for Black Studies. You see, first that we study ourselves. We use the study of our lives and our own experience to edify ourselves.
Yeah.
You see, and through the study of ourselves, we study what it means to be human. You see, This is what cultures are supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that it's only right that we do that, rather than being consumed by, oh, every day I'm a victim of racism, so on.
Yeah.
Study, understand understand what it means to be black, understand the black self. You see, I became more balanced and rational and at peace with myself the more I understood who black people were.
Yeah.
My culture was. So it's really important to do that. And the book, the Racism Handbook for people classified as black, is a black studies guide, you see? So it's useful to help us to edify and become strong, rational, spiritual and physical beings.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to describe it in that context, because I think sometimes if you describe something as a fight, then the term fight can be quite in itself oppressive. If you talk about something as being uplifting and edifying, there may be more of a motivation, maybe.
No, absolutely. No, you're right. The spiritual, and that's, but one of the aspects of black study is spirituality.
Yeah.
Religion. You see, that's why black studies is so important. You see, the third tenet, the third aspect of black studies is that it's inherently an anti-racist activity. So it occurs, black studies occurs in the very context of our exploitation and our oppression. It occurs like that. So when we study ourselves and we study our religion, we study our spirituality, we study our science, we then become whole.
Yeah.
You see, we then become whole. Not to do it is destructive, okay? Very destructive to the black mind.
I mean, I remember I've been very blessed. When I was 16, living in Jamaica, I was given the book, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, by a brother who used to live just across the road. And that book was utterly, it was life-changing, because I'd never seen black people described in that way. And it just speaks to the power of one book. One book can change your life. And absolutely. I note that there's someone who critiqued the book, who described your book as life-changing. And I have to concur with that. I really do think it is life-changing. And I'm going to speak more about how people can get the book momentarily. But one of the things that I want to go back to, something that you spoke about, which you've also is also in your book, and that's reparations.
Sure.
So can you just say what reparations means and the role of it in our liberation?
Well, it comes back then to when we talk about reparations means repair.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we need to repair ourselves, and we tend to think of reparations as some sort of monetary payout. That's only a part of it, is to repair ourselves. I think reparations is essential. We might not see it in our lifetime. We need to be aware of that. But it's essential that we try to get it, because the capitalist world economy is still functioning in the same way that it functioned 500 years ago. It's absolutely the same. Well, I mean, reparations is a massive subject. It's also contentious as well. And many black people have different views about it. I'm not a reparationist, or it's not my singular field of study. But the chapter in my book just gives an overview of reparations. I particularly argue that it's necessary for us to fight for reparations. Reparations, of course, isn't just money, but it includes restitution. You see, to restore victims. Well, first of all, why do we need reparations? Well, because of slavery. We're living through the legacies of slavery, you see. And the capitalist world economy is still functioning in the way it always did, is sucking Africa dry So it's still doing what it's always done, okay? We are living through the legacies of racism. Black people are disproportionately discriminated because of race, which comes directly from empire. So reparations for what is called the Atlantic slave trade is essential, I think, for restoring black people in some aspects of our very existence. All right? So it includes restitution, restoring the victim back to what they were, compensation. That's where there's some monetary aspect. I don't believe that my personal view is I don't believe that it should be given to individuals, but I do believe that it should be some sort of collective payout over a long period of time, because we're talking of billions and billions and perhaps trillions of dollars and pounds. Then there's rehabilitation, that we need. It needs to go beyond the monetary, actually.
Yeah.
There needs to be psychological repairs that need to happen, and maybe we're going to need assistance monetarily to do that. And then there's satisfaction. In other words, we need to know that we will at some point get a public apology. We haven't been given a public apology, even though it appears that sometimes they almost are on the edge of that. The system has never apologized for slavery.
Yeah.
I'm presently writing a book on poems, post-colonial poems, and I have a poem on reparations, which basically is about the fact that reparations is color-coded. Whites have got reparations.
Yeah.
Other brown people have got reparations, but black people have never been given reparations. That's my poem, something about passion. And then coming back to those different tenets of reparations, finally, the guarantees of non-repetition. In other words, we want to be in the position as black people that we won't suffer the continuation of some of the crimes that come directly from slavery. We're suffering in ways that are directly related to slavery, and we don't want those to be repeated on us. You see, we don't. Yeah. But at the moment, as I said earlier, Africa is still being siphoned of its wealth. You see, it's still being. There's ecological dimensions as well to racism. So we want to guarantee that there's going to be non-repetitions of some of the structural violence and ecological violence that has been committed to black people globally. So that's just a little overview of some of the things of reparation. It's not just money, okay? Yeah. It's not just money. There's a lot of good books on reparation. If you read my chapter on reparation, it's deeply sourced, and you'll find lots of sources and citations there that can help people do a more thorough study. One of the things doing a Black Studies Guide is that you do an overview. You see, this is volume 1. So my chapter just does an overview of reparations. I hope that's helped, basically, that the certain aspects of reparations, not just the monetary payout, but it's repairing the black group that has been oppressed through slavery and colonization over hundreds and hundreds of years.
Thank you. Just want to ask your thoughts on something, Brother Howard, because we've talked about the European system of oppression upon Africa and those of African descent, and the impacts of capitalism aligned with racism. What are your thoughts on I don't think the word is alliances. I don't think that's the correct word, but on the intervention of China in Africa and the Caribbean, and the relationship between African countries, Caribbean countries, and China?
Well, I think that China is carrying out white supremacy. Yeah, I mean, they're just following the footsteps of white supremacy. They're doing exactly what the West are doing. Okay, they're non-white. Okay, so we might think that we're going to get a better deal in the long run, but I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah.
They're doing exactly what the West is doing. So their investment, I believe, has gone up at least 50% since, I think since 2020. It's gone up. The investments in Africa have gone up. So they are carrying out the basic function of white supremacy, which is extraction of wealth, buying up places in Africa and so on. No, I don't see it as a positive thing. I see it as an extension of white supremacy and domination of the African continent. That's how I see it. And that would be the same in the Caribbean. Yeah, I don't see China doing anything different than what the capitalist world economy is presently doing to the global south. I don't see China in any special way. I don't see why I should. I don't see why.
Yeah. I'm going to quote something from the book, and then we're going to have you say about how people can get the book.
Sure.
But it's a quote from you where you say, dedicated to all Black and African people, wherever you may find yourself, hoping this handbook will help you wake up out of your consumer trance and finally realize, before it's too late, that real freedom is not about getting ahead in this world. It's not about being famous or wealthy. It does not reside within European academic intellectualism, Marxism, or any other ism outside the ontology of Black people. We must all engage in direct anti-racist Black activism, either as individuals, families, or as groups. We must do this to change our debased racial status in this world, so that we will be treated as dignified human beings and equal to others. Otherwise, you and your family will be complaining about individual and systemic racism forever. Brother, when I read that, I found that both enlightening and ominous at the same time, I have to say. I just want you to talk about that, Brother Howard.
Was that in the preface, or where was that?
That was right at the beginning. It's a
I see that
part of your dedication.
Oh, right, I got you. Let me just see what that is. Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah, well, that's how I feel. I do think that many Black people today are just concerned with race and representation. So in other words, as long as Black people are represented in society, in some jobs, as long as I've got a job, as long as I've got a house and a car, then it's just the question of improving the nation state of which I'm in, you see? I see that as being footnotes in other people's history myself. So I think that a lot of that is consumer, I call that a consumer trance, where you just want to get stuff. And the degree to which you get stuff means you're liberated. I think that's deadly. I don't think that we're going to survive. If you look at what's going down globally with China and the West, there's a bigger picture going on in Africa and just generally the global South. So I don't think it's just about me getting ahead personally. I don't think it's about that. I think there are bigger things at play. We need reparations. We need to stop the extraction of the wealth in Africa, or the Africans there need to stop that, and it will pan out to the rest of the Black world, you see. So that's what I meant by that, you see. That was the quote. I must engage in anti-racist Black activism. Like I said, it's essential for our character to be anti-racist, not just to live as Black people, going from incident to incident. Oh, someone did this and someone did that and someone did this. No, but to edify ourselves. That's why I think Black studies is so essential.
Yeah.
So essential because it's holistic as well. You see, we're not just getting up in the morning, going to work, living, oh, look, someone said something racist, I'm not happy with that and so on, but having more meaning to our lives. We're not just come here to get stuff, you know, like we're in some sort of consumer trance. Yeah. It's more important than that. That
You know what, Howard? I just see it as necessary in order to save humanity. I really do. I feel that racism and for me, the horror of racism and capitalism is that it dehumanizes you. It makes you into a commodity that serves the interests of a few.
absolutely.
And I think that we have been so bought and purchased over and over again, if not the physical body back on the auction block. How many years ago? The psychological mind has been bought and purchased over and over again, to the point that we don't realize what it means to be human anymore. You know? So what you are doing, this work, and this is just volume 1. And you've got two more volumes to come, is that right?
That's right. The second volume is more of the same information. There's more to know, much more to know. So the second volume is more, it's the same level, but there's more information. We need to know more things. And then volume 3 is the Racism Handbook for young people.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
The young people. Now, that one I've decided to include whites, blacks, and Asians, because when you're young, you interact with each other. And it's really essential that we understand a bit about what Asians are, what their culture is, and also whites. You see, you're interacting with everybody. Yeah. So I think that's why I've decided if it's young people that I need to pan it out, whereas 1 and 2 is primarily for the black readers. I mean, anybody can read it, but it's as a conversation to black adults. But yeah, it's a black studies book. So I've got there's other areas. If I could just spend a few minutes just talking about black studies a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So black studies is kind of has a it began in the United States, okay, with the African Americans in their struggles against when they came out of slavery. So just after the Civil War, historically, black colleges were set up.
Yeah.
But they were just set up to silo black people off into lower forms of education, but black people weren't going to have that. So through sittings, strikes, and freedom rides, and rallies and protests, black people wanted to take control of the curriculum. And they did take the control of the curriculum. And so Black Studies was born. So it's about 10 to 12 disciplines: race, class, gender, anthropology, as I said, psychology, spirituality, religion, and so on. And through those different disciplines, you can pan it down to sort of 5 major aspects of Black Studies, a kind of framework, inclusive framework. First, it starts with African Americans' struggles, but it pans out to Black studies and the diaspora, blacks all around the world. Secondly, blacks are the main agents in Black studies. So we're studying ourselves. And the agency is that we speak about ourselves. We study ourselves and our experience. So it's the study of our experience since coming out of slavery. Third thing, Black studies is inherently anti-racist. It's anti-racist by definition, because obviously Black studies began within oppression, as I said, in the United States, taking control of the curriculum. And finally, Black studies, well, the fourth thing I think is Black studies is a celebration of our culture as well, okay, because we have our culture. We can draw on Black medieval culture, we can draw on ancient culture, so there's lots to celebrate in our Blackness. And then finally, it represents an analysis of the political and economic capitalist world economy as it relates to Black people's domination during slavery and colonialism. And that relates to basically how the West is still carrying out wealth extraction from Africa. You see? So we look at that as well. So in that sense, there's a lot to cover in the first 2 volumes. Now you don't have to go to university for it. It's right there in a book in easy language as possible and fully sourced as well. So we can develop our studies. We can say, look, you know what? I want to study a little bit more about the psychology. You said the sources. I want to study a little bit more about religion. The sources are there and so on. All right. So it's Black Studies without going to the university to do it, because we only have one Black Studies degree in Birmingham. See, we only have one. That's what it's about.
Brother, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know, either about the book or anything else that we've discussed?
Well, you've taken me through the whole. Wow. You've really worked me today. Tell you what, really hard. You're very demanding. Wow. No, I think I think I've
In a good way, hopefully, in a good way.
Of course. And I think I've said everything really that I need to say. I think the main thing is to understand that the book is a Black Studies guide. You can understand yourself through the book. You see, that's really important. Yeah.
Brother Howard, I am so appreciative to you. I cannot recommend this book enough. It's the Racism Handbook for People Classified as Black, a guide to how racism really works. Brother, if someone wants to purchase the book, and I'm going to say to everyone listening that you need to purchase one for yourself, one for a friend, one for a family member. It needs to be essential reading. It needs to be in your book stand, by your bedside, in your handbag, wherever. But if someone wants to purchase a book, brother, how do they go about doing that?
Okay, they can go to my website, which is www.theracismhandbook.com. They can also go to newbeaconbooks.com, which is, the classic bookshop of our history, New Beacon Books. You can also get it at the Mahat Center, that is Pepperquai Book Distributions. But if you just put the Mahat Center in a Google search, you'll see that you can get the book through his services. You can also get the book on blackhistorybooks.uk. So I'll just say those again.
I'm going to repeat all of that so they can get it on your website, which is www.theracismhandbook.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can also get it at Blue Beacon Books.
New
Beacon Books. My apologies. Let me say that again. New Beacon Books, BEACON, newbeaconbooks.com. If you do a Google search on Maat, MA''AT Center, you can get it there. We'll come up there. And also blackhistorybooks.uk. I'll make sure all of that is on the Kemet FM Facebook page. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been great. I've been educated. I'm sure our listeners have been educated as well. And when Volume 2 and Volume 3 comes out, let's have another discussion.
Wow, thank you so much for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome, brother.
You say that in February, I will be at the New Beacon Bookshop. That's in London doing a book launch.
Okay.
But maybe I'll send you the details of that as well.
Please.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you very much for your time. I'm really grateful for having this.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. I want to thank Brother Howard Johnson and to also express a debt of gratitude to him, not just for taking the time to be on the show, but for taking the time and effort to write a book that is life-changing. if you take the time to read and understand it and follow through on what it has to say. I think discussions of this type cause you to be reflective. So if you don't mind, I'm going to express some personal thoughts and opinions. You know, when we look at the status of Black people in the world today, it's easy to feel defeated, probably even natural to feel defeated. The sad reality is that we have been conquered and subjugated for centuries. As far as I am aware, and I may be wrong, there is no majority Black country that has real influence and power on the world stage. We do not influence international policy. We don't have powerful currencies that dictate markets and financial trading. For the most part, we do not own the resources in our countries, and I am unaware of one major international Black-owned company of the likes of Unilever or Ford or Apple or Walmart. There may be one, I don't know. There may be more than one, I just don't know. Now, I'm not saying that this is a model that we should be following. I don't think it is. However, the significance of this is that as a people, we are not respected. Europe and America may not like the Chinese, but they have to respect them. They have to respect them because what they say and what they do makes a difference globally. The Chinese are known for being the world's manufacturer, and thus their influence extends far beyond their borders. As a people, we are highly intelligent, extremely creative, and closely connected to nature. These are qualities that are crucial to humanity's survival, in my opinion. However, if you were to ask non-Black people what we are known for, what we are good at, I don't think many of them will mention any of these characteristics. Not because we don't have them, but because we are not organized as a collective force, I would say. If we are known for anything, it is for being the world's entertainers, the athletes, the singers, the dancers, and that in and of itself demonstrates the level of disrespect that is shown to us. No criticism of athletes, singers, and dancers. What I'm talking about is how we are regarded as a community globally. Now, don't get me wrong. We have millions of us who are monumentally intelligent. There are millions of us who have business and are in influential positions. But as a collective group, as a group categorized as Black and as a group of African and Caribbean nations, we are, unfortunately, now at the bottom of the barrel. Now, it wasn't always like this. Every group of people has its peaks and its troughs. And if we know our history, we know that we were once empowered and powerful people. But the last 500 years or so have been absolutely devastating for us. And it's going to be down to us to choose to rise again. Let me bring this closer to home. As fate would have it, the very day that I did the interview with Brother Howard Johnson, someone WhatsApped me a video of a sister from Nottingham decrying the closure of the Marcus Garvey Centre and making an appeal to the leader of the council to reopen it and saying that the community will march if necessary. The sister was passionate, she was eloquent, she was intelligent, and she clearly wanted to garner support for this cause. I respected her passion and her dedication to see an iconic building remain in the hands of our community. Despite all of that, I also felt frustration and sadness. My thoughts even, were not on making appeals to the City Council to reopen the Marcus Garvey Centre, but why, after being black-run for well over 40 years, possibly over 50 years, the Marcus Garvey Centre is not owned by us. I have to say, and this is just my opinion, that I think that it's shameful that it isn't owned by us. Now, should the council fund spaces of this type? In my opinion, yes. Should we, in 2025, be having to beg to fund our centres? In my opinion, no. And this is where an understanding of racism is vital. In the 80s, Nottingham had the most black spaces and places in the country outside of London. This was a consequence of the aftermath of the resistance, people refer to them as riots, when councils and government threw money at the black community to appease us. Now, if you think they did this out of the goodness of their hearts, you're fooling yourself respectfully. They did not want to see the destruction of their property, so they leased, not gave, spaces and places to shut us up, and we were glad to have them, even though we were getting nothing in reality. But because these spaces and places were never ours, they can take them back at any time, and they have. It says something so dire about our community if our response to this subjugation, lack of respect, and dehumanization is to march. March and then do what? It speaks to our power, or should I say, lack thereof. Let me give you another example. One day a week, I attend a Hindu temple for a yoga class. And every time I go there, I look at a large plaque on the wall that has the name of its donors. They are all Asian. And you see donations of £100, £200, £500, £1,000, £5,000, £10,000. That building and the land it is on is theirs. Nobody can take it from them. They are not begging anyone to give them money other than their own. Now, I would ask you whether you can say one centre in Nottingham that we own. I'm not saying there isn't any, but I don't know of any. Certainly not any where the community pulled and pulled together to say, this is ours. There is no reason why this couldn't happen. And I know that there have been efforts to do this, some of which have been successful to some extent. The Hindus have their temple not because they are better than us, but because they have an understanding of themselves that we have been stripped of. They don't define themselves in opposition to another group, but as a collective force with values, qualities, and traditions that unify. Let me give you one more example. The black hair industry is worth billions, more than the gross domestic product of some African and Caribbean countries. Black women spend hundreds of pounds on their hair. I've known women spend thousands of pounds just for a weave. Now, some of the biggest consumers of designer products is us. I've known people spend hundreds of pounds on a t-shirt. What do you think would happen if we said, for just 1 month, the money that I would normally spend on weaves and hair products and on designer clothes, I'm going to donate to a Marcus Garvey Centre ownership collection drive. Just think about that. And this is what we have to do. And this book is the handbook for that. So I'm going to repeat now how and where you can purchase it. You can purchase it on the Racism Handbook website, which is www.theracismhandbook.com. That's www.theracismhandbook.com. You can also get it at New Beacon Books. That's www.newbeaconbooks, all one word. Beacon is BEACON.com. If you Google the Ma'at Centre, that's MA''AT, you will see another book distributor. You can also get it at www.blackhistorybooks.uk, and it's also available at Waterstones and Foyles. I would encourage you, I urge you, for your own well-being, to get a copy of this book. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to having your listening ears next month. And as I always say, until next time, walk good and walk with God.